There's a video floating around the internet, basically a video breaking down how each class scales going up to Ulduar kind of by the numbers. And it has a great idea here, but when it came out, it has a lot of misinformation. So our boy Blizz and Bob over at the Warcraft Reloaded podcast got me together with Simonize and our boy Rugs, all of us in one call, so we could break down this video and kind of show you guys what you want to look out for when you're looking at a video going into the numbers of how your class is going to perform in Ulduar. My disclaimer really is that we don't know exactly how the classes will scale. We have a really solid representation though with the Sims over at wowsims.github. The Sims website does have all of the new procs and also trinkets inlaid in it pretty much. So it is a very solid representation of how our classes will do, but we won't know exactly until we have Ulduar on the PTR. And one last thing actually is you guys can actually now finally check out the Classic Life podcast, mine with Crix, over on Spotify. I'm working on getting on iTunes, but there's going to be a ton of our episodes all put up there. So if you missed anything, make sure to check those out.
Okay, we're going to start off with the video here. This is how does your class scale? Ulduar by the numbers. This is from YouTube account World of Chigurh. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. That's the guy from No Country for Old Men, obviously. Very cool. Has put together a very nice video, as he says, by the numbers, how item level affects the damage output of different classes and specializations. So we're going to get right into this here.
Today, I would like to talk to you about scaling in Wrath of the Lich King. The reason I wanted to make this video is because I believe that a vast majority of the community that have been playing on private servers for the past 12 years for Wrath of the Lich King don't really have a clue on which classes are good. If you looked at any of the tier lists going into Phase 1, I would say a vast majority of them had Feral Druids in S tier.
Okay. Are we all here? Are we all on the same page? We're not even 30 seconds in.
Shade was thrown.
Shade is thrown. You have to pause it.
Yep,
I need a pause.
He even has, I think it's one of your lists up.
He does.
Oh, okay. It is paused.
Okay, listen. I just need to get this off my chest. Hell, I could have made a whole video about this before, but I may as well do it here. This seems like a good space to just say this. And this guy is not alone in the shade at all. But let me just first clarify, the tier list that you see on your screen right now is a tier list, and this is specifically zoomed in to an Ulduar prediction of Classic Wrath that I made 11 months ago. Nearly an entire year ago. That's what we're looking at.
Before Classic Wrath even came out.
Before, I don't even know. Was this Phase 2 of TBC?
Was the beta even out?
It was a long time ago.
Okay.
Long time.
The video maker throwing a little bit of shade on a video from a year ago as the opening. Okay.
Okay, I have to mini rant here, because to just say that private server guys don't know anything and kicking off your video with that is just so insanely small brain to me, because I feel like we and myself, guys who played private servers for years and years and shared our opinions and shared the meta that we have experienced, how is that useless or small or bad information? That doesn't make any sense. We are here to share with you all what we've seen, and ignorance of what we have seen would just mean that you're starting with no baseline. We are there to provide baseline knowledge of the expansion going into it, so we have somewhere to theorycraft from and build a meta off of. That being said, Classic and private server Wrath are completely different games. They just are. Mm-hmm. They cannot be compared one-to-one. There are interactions on Classic that weren't there on private. There are interactions on private that weren't there that are not there on Classic. They are just inherently different. And so it just seems so weird.
And you even say that all of the time in your videos, and you said it forever ago. You said, look, this is just the best info that we have, and why not give it to you and just see what happens? You know what I mean? This part of the video was definitely in bad taste, in my opinion.
It's
Okay.
it's weird that like everyone wants to jump on like this snapshot of the video, like this tier list. Everyone is like looking at a couple things, and the big one is like ferals because they think I'm
Everyone's
like
looking
some
at feral.
shill. They think like, oh my god, like Rugs was so wrong. LOL saying feral is S tier. It's like it's not that I was right or wrong. The games are inherently different products. And if you go play on a private server right now to this very fucking day, good feral players are going to be doing S tier damage.
Yep.
It is still like that. And that was not like opinions or information based on like feral copium. That is just like factual evidence based on like Wrath private server interactions that we are like used to. That's a meta that built up over years of consistent like feral pumpage. On top of the fact that like on private servers, we don't have shit for logs. When we have logs, they're terrible, they're hard to read, and half the time they get broken before they actually upload. And Hysteria isn't getting like taken off of it. Like Hysteria is always
Which
going to
obviously
be
went to the
applied.
feral.
Yeah, which
Also
obviously is on your feral, which is adding like somewhere between 60k to like 100k extra damage done on any given boss fight or whatever it is. Like it's ridiculous. So all that to be said, like consider for a second the fact that like private server players never really had like a whole lot of theory crafters. We were like missing just the sheer number of players like playing the game and breaking it and bending it over backwards and making it their bitch. Seriously, like a guy like White Wolf rose up in the private server scene very late in the game. Where we're looking at this tier list, like I made that video and this tier list well before Dual Wield Unholy was even in its infancy in Theory Crafted. Like, we were so far behind in our like evolution of this game that to hold it to the same standard and to say like, oh, Rugs is wrong or private server guys are wrong, it's like it doesn't make sense and it's very small brained.
I agree with that. It's like a lot of when, like you said, you had a smaller community on private servers, and when you take and like the theory crafting that comes out of that is just generally not going to be as refined as when you take and you apply the like entire classic WoW player base to a similar game. Like you just have so many more people interacting with the game, trying new things, pushing it to its limit, bending it over backwards, as you said, is a good way to put it. And also, like, there's a handful of interactions that are just different. Like in classic World of Warcraft, we had Mutilate, main hand attack, giving 2 chances to trigger poisons. And it's like, it didn't do that on the private servers. And that has pretty big implications for how you gear a Mutilate rogue. And I think Omen of Clarity works differently on private servers that almost certainly would bump feral druids up. I'm not as familiar about that, but like it's going to be these like small interactions, like you said, different game. So it's like private server information is like a good, in my view, is a good starting point, but you got to like reanalyze it through like what's going on in classic World of Warcraft.
When I first started my YouTube channel, this video that we're looking at here, the tier list for every phase of Wrath, that one kind of blew up. But I had another video that kind of like went semi-viral that like kind of built my channel about a year ago. And in that video, it was like a rant, because I guess I'm known for ranting, is a prep for classic Wrath. And it's just me taking 15 minutes to say everything that you receive between now and the classic release, you have to take with a grain of salt. And so anyone who's out there saying like, oh, I'm backpedaling, like, no, like I'm not backpedaling. You weren't receiving the information that I was putting out or anyone was putting out with enough salt. Like you had the wrong perspective on what we were approaching this game with.
Yeah, and you've said it over and over on my podcast, on Classic Live, on your channel, like all over the place. You even were on with Hamster Wheel the other day. Like, and you said it every time over and over, and you know, people just don't want to listen.
Yeah, but I think that's like innate, right? In a tier list or anything, right? Someone will always look at it, and like this one, I mean, did really well, obviously. So like someone will look at that, and it's hard for them to even think about listening to the points you make about it. They always, for some reason, no matter what, 80% of the comments are like, I can't believe you're so dumb. Why would you ever put that there? And like, even if you go and explain it 6 times in the tier list, like 6 times, you can literally be like, you could have said in this video 6 separate times, I'm putting Feral here because with Hysteria, it's really high. And with the interactions of Omen of Clarity on the private servers, which we don't know if it'll be as good as it will be on the live realms. Right now on private servers from that data, Feral is absolutely in S tier. And then like literally as what we have now, right? Like you could easily go back and be like, well, obviously Feral kind of is not really doing that well. And like, but people will see that and be like, this fucking guy, dude, this guy's a shill for Ferals forever. He was, because when we did the tier list on like during the beta, the actual beta, right, we did a tier list together, and you like said Feral was doing really well, and I was like, I don't think there's enough data because you're the only Feral I've seen, and like I don't think other people are playing well yet too, so like I don't think there's enough data yet. And like you agreed to be like, yeah, let's put it in like not enough data. We don't know how it's going to perform, right? Like it's not like you're like set in stone for thinking it's going to be the best, right? You're like, and the same thing with anything on this list. It's like the information's so old now, and it was the stepping stone, right? It was how things were played on the private servers. Now, obviously, things change massively when you go to live realms, and we have a massive player pool, and every class has theory crafters that go nuts, right? Like if the private servers had like Simon eyes on their rogues would be like destroying, right? So yeah, it's very different.
Everything in the world weaving now. So like just think of all the weird stuff that so many people have come up with, and it's really neat. That's something that I talked about prior to a Wrath. I was like, I can't wait to see how all the big brains break stuff, because I knew it was going to happen, and it's been great. But
who would have guessed that crafted Titan Steel Spellblade is better than Havoc's Call Blade of Lordaeron Kings when you're casting Fan of Knives?
Yeah,
you know,
heroic Lich King, right? You're like, who would have thought that was literally the best item in the game, and we could get it now?
Oh man.
Okay, so we've covered the idea that like maybe using reference material from a year ago is not the most concrete a source. We want to. My chat's getting mad at me now for pausing for too long, but I told them we're professional streamers. This is a 17-minute video. We're gonna milk at least 90 minutes of content out of it. All right, let's get back to it.
Yeah, let's watch it.
So, I would like to use some data and math to more accurately predict what will happen in Ulduar, based on the thousands of logs that we currently have for Naxxramas. So on screen right now, you can see that using Warcraft logs, you can select the all item level scaling option to see how well classes are scaling. And to more accurately math out future predictions with this data, I chose item levels between 200 and 213 because this is where most people sit at when it comes to gear versus the maybe few dozen people that have item levels of 217. So let's get to the math. First, I'll show you what is currently the best specs. So currently, in green, I have highlighted roughly the top 5 best specs. And this is solely based on fairly short fights, which is using patchwork, and thus pure single target. The reason I chose patchwork is because I believe it represents the easiest way to math out scaling in the future, instead of trying to account for movement during the fight. And after you get past the top 5 best specs that are currently performing, when you look at maximum DPS between the 200 and 213 eye level, you get to the medium specs in yellow and the bad specs in red. So what I did here is I took the maximum amount of DPS in between these 13 eye level brackets, and I took the minimum, and then I took the difference between these, and this is the amount of scaling that is happening, and then I put this into a percentage, which is in the 5th column, and this represents how well these classes are scaling, given the thousands of data points that we currently have. Now, if you sort scaling instead of DPS, you can currently see that Marksman Hunters, Feral Druids, Enhanced Shamans, and DKs are scaling the best, But once you get to the enhancement shamans, DKs, fire mages, survival hunters, arcane mages, they're pretty much scaling at about the same, at the 26.5% mark. So it appears that there is a decent amount of classes that are scaling fairly equally, with marksman hunters being the outlier.
Alando
He's
pointed
trying
out
to take the best players.
that rogues, a lot of them are using 2-piece slayers.
Yeah, I'm
For
gonna.
eye
I'm gonna.
level.
I got some words about that.
Okay.
So basically, like he's working in a bracket of about 13 item levels, and he's seeing how much the DPS goes up by. You can take, your 2-piece slayers. These are item level 154 pieces, and upgrade them to item level 213 pieces from Naxxramas. And we know from the spreadsheets and simulation tools, they all agree that when you upgrade 2-piece slayer to 2x, Naxxramas 25 man, item level 213 items, it's barely a difference. It's essentially a wash. It's just like the most minuscule of upgrade. So when you upgrade just those 2 item slots from 154 to 213, you raise your average item level by 6.5. Literally half of the like window he's looking at, a plus 13 average item level. So when you have people at like 213 average item level and people at 200 item level that are both using and not using the Slayers set, you have a problem with your data, because you have people of significantly different item level dealing essentially the same damage output. So it kind of, the premise of this method of analysis is that as you raise item level, you raise player damage output.
Yeah.
And like specifically with rogues, and I'm sure this occurs to some extent with other classes, you have a very egregious example of very low eye level items providing like outperforming their item level, which the effect of this is going to be exactly what you see here, that like it tells you that, oh, rogues don't scale very well. And
It
the
hits
way
rogues the most too.
Yeah, and it's like not even close.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically deleting half their scaling, because this item level difference that is like 6.5 item level is about half that range to make no DPS difference. Like, just like half your, it's fucked. The way you would have to, the way you'd have to control the data to do this properly is you would have to look at only rogues that use 2-piece Slayer set and do that comparison, or look at only rogues that don't use Slayer's set and do that comparison. You have to separate them. And there's a handful of other items for rogues that like upgrading the item level doesn't increase your damage output, or does it very little. Like Librarian's Paper Cutter is a eye level 200 weapon that is just like, there's one weapon in the game that's better than it. So like you're going to have people like in Naxxramas being like, well, this item's epic, so I'm going to equip it. And then they're going to raise their item level and do less damage. Or like equipping your Fury of the 5 Flights or your Grim Toll eye level 213 trinkets instead of
For
your
no
eye
point.
level.
Yeah.
Eye level like 200 Mirror of Truth or eye level 200 Greatness card is like a wash or slightly worse. So like you have another example of raising the item level but not really meaningfully impacting the damage. So that kind of scuffs this whole method of analysis.
The idea behind this analysis is really like it's nice. It's nice to go through and like look at the actual numbers and how things are scaling. So it's in the similar vein of like him talking about the old data from private servers, right? Like it can be used as like kind of an indication, but there's a lot more that goes on. And I know we'll get into that, especially when we talk about anything like any of the stats that scale really well, obviously with something like armor penetration, crit is already scaling pretty well for fire mages, but that just like goes crazy. Fire mages also have been confirmed that they have to deal with ignite munching forever, which is going to hurt them in ICC significantly, right? The more they crit, now you're losing damage. So like things like that all need to be taken into account. And of course, obviously there's like trinkets or items that are way lower eye level that are just so good. So like just focusing on eye level is like, it's a reference point. It's a reference point. That's, yeah, that's all.
And then if you go down the list, you can see that there are some medium scaling classes, which are surprisingly warriors, which should be scaling more so than this, given that warriors in general scaled the best out of the expansions. And then you go to the worst performing scaling classes in your Shadow Priest, Frost Death Knight, and Rogue specs, with rogues being way worse than anything else. And then given this scaling difference, you could add the 13 eye levels that this percentage represents onto the 213. So add this percentage onto a 213 and you get 226, which will roughly be the 10-man eye level for Ulduar since they're changing the item levels. And thus, if you sort by eye level for 10-man Ulduar, you can see that there is some differences in best specs. So, as you can see, Assassination Rogues, since they scale terribly, they went from a good spec in green all the way to below 50 percentile in the rankings. So you can see, due to the scaling percentage, Frost Death Knights, Assassination Rogues, and Combat Rogues are now middle of the pack and or very poor specs, where you can see Marksman Hunters now are middle of the road because of their excellent scaling.
I don't know about Marksman Hunter, but that's really impressive.
You know what's interesting? So Marksman Hunter has been found out now. So from the private servers, it was you go Marksman when you hit a certain armor pen cap. And that's actually not true. It's actually, you switch to Marksman and it outperforms survival when you hit a certain like weapon damage. So when you get a better weapon. So in Ulduar is when we'll swap to Marksman actually, because it's weapon damage scaling. And, so and also a lot of this is interesting because hunters are all just getting better at trap weaving, and they should be trap weaving, but I would probably wager 90% of hunters aren't trap weaving. So like the highest percentage, if we ever look at anything that's not like the 99th percentage, are all going to be a lot lower than what the 99th percentage, especially for marksmen or unholy and anything like that, right? Because they are playing the class the correct way, but it's not a widely known play style, and also it's like more effort. And I've heard from people that they're like, I don't want to move my character, but yeah.
Yep, probably the majority of people.
This is not the way to manipulate the data to address the problem of Slayer's set, 154 eye level, like outperforming its eye level. Like just taking a wider range of data isn't the way to account for that, because you have people using and not using Slayers throughout that whole eye level range. Like I said before, the way to address that properly is to separate all the rogues using Slayers from all the rogues not using Slayers. That's the way to account for that. And like when you look at the chart he had at the start of like rogue scaling, and it literally goes down at some point when you increase item level, that like should be a red flag that the premise of like increasing item level increases damage output. That should be a very clear red flag that something's going wrong here and you're not going to get a good result. He's taking the percentage difference that each class gained from going from 200 to 213 and then, extrapolating that, saying, you take your eye level 213 DPS and you apply that percentage gain to then generate this chart, 226. So that's assuming, linear scaling with item level is essentially, which, this whole stream is about, it's an okay way to do things, but there's going to be a lot of caveats.
What he's about to commit to is he's about to say that good guilds won't take rogues in Ulduar. He's about to say that based on his findings and based on this chart.
Well,
there
look
is
how low
no
rogue is. Look how
way.
low combat rogue and assassination. They obviously don't scale, and I don't think you would. Shadow Priest is down there too. Fury Warrior's in shambles, right?
Dude,
In
there is
shambles.
no world where rogue will do less than a ret paladin in Ulduar.
Oh no,
world.
you don't see the graph, obviously. Okay.
Okay,
I just gotta
okay.
pause. Rugs
I've made a
needs
grave
glasses,
error.
guys.
I've made a grave error in disrespecting any of my warrior brothers at the bottom of the meter. I realize that I'm now going to be down there with them,
Yeah.
and I have to make good friends with them now.
Yeah, now you're all there together, okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
I will touch on, since we are looking at a snapshot of what he's saying 239 eye level will look like.
Okay.
A couple set bonuses that I know of in particular that will help this, that he admittedly knows isn't being accounted for in this video, which is okay. I'm glad he admits that. But some things that we'd be looking for like power spikes in Ulduar is, I know Enhanced Shaman gets a great 4-piece. Fire Mage, a phenomenal 4-piece, on top of the fact that they have no longer as many hit issues, plus they're getting a good amount of crit and haste. Feral gets a phenomenal 2-piece set bonus. Shadow Priest gets a ridiculous set bonus in Ulduar. It's super, super good for Shadow Priest in Ulduar, which is great because Shadow Priests are down bad. Paladins, if anything, all they have is this eye level increase, because they probably actually get worse in Ulduar than they are currently in Nax, considering that there's no undead mobs in Ulduar for them to, take advantage of with Sense Undead and all the things that, increase their damage to undead targets.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that is just not being accounted for here in this snapshot that I just want to point out from my own knowledge of what is strong in Ulduar.
If we were to look at this like now and like kind of revise this, what are the ones that stand out the most as, like, without looking at their actual DPS numbers, other than Rogue, because the Rogue one blows my mind? What are the ones that stand out the most to you guys? Like, Rugs, from your experience, and then Simon, from looking at the numbers that have been broken down so far.
Right. So in my experience and in my recommendation, like, say we were talking about like a loot council thing, where would I prio tier to, because I want to give people these power spikes as soon as I possibly can? It would be a Fire Mage. It would be 2-piece for Feral Druid. It would be 4-piece for Enhance. It would be Shadow Priest. Hell, I'd even throw Disc Priest in there, but that's not really in the conversation on a damage conversation. So Enhance, yeah, it's going to go up. Fire Mage going to go way up. But that's also weird because Fire/Arcane, it depends on the fight. On a pure single target fight, hell, Arcane still might win out. And even then, we don't actually even know what the value of the 251 eye level gear will be. There is a world, we don't know yet, that Fire Mages don't actually even use their set bonus. Despite how godly it is, it might be a loss because of the eye level loss, instead of just using pure off pieces that are 251 off pieces, because of how valuable that is. So it's really tough to say. I also know Frosty K gets a really solid 2-piece here. And that's about all I know for set bonuses.
Do you think Warriors are going to scale this poorly? I'm curious.
I don't think they're going to scale that poorly, but it's like, I mean, the main line from a lot of Warriors is, oh, Warrior is a very good scaling class. And like, we understand that. We've seen that in Classic. We've seen that in TBC. Right now, they don't just need to be a good scaling class. They need to be an insane scaling class, because they don't just need to scale insane. They need to scale insanely better than all the other classes scale to make up the massive gulf between warrior damage output and other class damage output, right? For them to be competitive, they don't just have to be insanely good scalers. They have to be insanely better scalers than everyone else to make up that gap.
Yeah.
So I say, like, I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it, is, how I usually put it.
So, again, Rogues and Warriors and Ret Paladins, I believe is going to be very, very sad news for Ulduar. And on top of this, these specs are typically brought for the trash damage, but Ulduar really doesn't have that much trash. Like an assassination rogue, even if they're the best at AoE damage, are they going to be taken if they're actually 4,000 DPS behind the top specs? Probably not, at least in very competitive guilds. And then same with warriors. Even if warriors were good at AoE or cleave on 4 or 5 target fights going into bosses, is 4,000 DPS worth it to bring them? Probably not. So if you're playing a melee right now, I'm not sure that's the best choice.
I also thought it was interesting how he said you bring us assassination rogues for trash, and I'm sitting there thinking,
And he said Rep
they
Paladin.
also do like one of the highest single target damage at the moment as well. So
Well, Bobby,
What are
I
you
think
talking about?
what he's talking about is like if the speculation, if his like analysis of item level scaling is correct, and like the single target meters look like he says they will, then yeah, you wouldn't be bringing assassination rogues for.
Yeah,
If they're actually down where he says they will be, then yeah, you wouldn't be doing that. I
but
think
did
that
he
advice is
just
based
say,
on that premise.
yeah, but did he just say right now you bring assassination rogues for trash? I thought that's
Um,
but maybe I
let's check.
misheard.
He did say that. He did say that. And
I
he said,
think,
and he
like,
said Rep Paladin.
That, I believe, is
on.
going to be very, very sad news for Ulduar. And on top of this, these specs are typically brought for the trash damage, but Ulduar really doesn't have that much trash. Like an assassination rogue, even if they're the best at AoE damage, are they going to be taken if they're actually 4,000 DPS behind the top specs?
if a class is good at trash damage, that means they're good at it for a reason, and that reason is typically probably outside of like the insane shit that rogues do, is typically because they're good at cleave. And there's a lot of cleave in Ulduar. We can't just
Like a
base
lot,
all of our,
right?
yeah, we can't just base like all of our assumptions on what's going to be the meta for guilds to run for DPS fully on 2-minute patchwork, 200 to 213 eye level scaling. Like,
Absolutely.
and that's all that we're looking at here, which is just very insane. There's a lot of cleave. Hell, Freya, Firefighter, Kolagarn, Iron Council doesn't really count. Algalon, Yogg.
Iron Council
fucking
counts because we're gonna
everything,
stack
dude.
everything.
That's not gonna count on logs. You know that they're not gonna count that.
They're gonna let us do it. Let us have fun.
No.
Warcraft vlogs. Let me pump.
Wait, Sarthe, you got to explain this a little more. Iron Council is like 2 dwarfs and like 1 really tall guy, right?
A
You fight them all
giant,
at
like
once?
yeah, this huge guy, and like
So why
he
wouldn't they
summons.
let us stack it?
He summons like this, like you'll get this like circle on the ground, and you could stand in it and you can pump, right? So like with what Rugs is saying, it makes sense that like Blizzard or Warcraft vlogs a lot of times will only count whichever, like they'll only count the damage from whatever like boss dies first and then into the next one, not if you cleave them down. And so Iron
Just
Council,
like on,
you'll have that sort
like
of
on Eridar twins.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you damage the other one, it doesn't count until the first one's dead. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably actually what they're gonna do, but I think it would be
Wow,
fun.
lame.
I'm curious, what do you guys think? Like, what is the fight in Ulduar to make an evaluation like this? Because every single fight has its own little nuance in Ulduar that you aren't gonna have the quote unquote patchwork. Like hell, XT is extremely long. And we've seen like boss kill length like have a massive effect on where classes end up in the meters. It's really long. Plus, it has like the damage increase window with a late lust. It's a weird one. Ignis, you would think another great patchwork fight. However, people get picked up into the pot, which also like loses their uptime but gives them a haste buff. I think
No, that
Algalon
person is out.
that person's out, but they also get a haste buff, so it's weird, you know. Algalon is a really good patchwork one, but that's got a lot of things moving, and like some people will need to have an assignment to damage stars and things like that. Like there's
you're gonna get RNG Unholy Death Knight parses where they wipe the raid if they don't get the first pickup into pot for their gargoyle snapshot. Right? Am I putting these pieces together right?
Maybe. How early is that ability, right? And how much haste? Because that's hilarious. Because then you could swap all of your proccing things, right? You swap your trinkets, swap out your cloak if you're doing cloak for that, and then like literally like make sure those don't proc for 30 seconds into the fight. If you get picked up at 20 seconds in, then you get dropped, you have a haste buff, and then you're the guy. It's like, I'm getting the 100. It's me. Let's go, guys. All right, Bloodlust now.
Again, I'm not super familiar with a lot of the fights, so I'm yielding to your guys' knowledge, but I'm pretty sure they like don't make that many patchwork-esque,
Right.
stand-in
Well-
DPS fights.
Right. And
I'll-
so
okay,
then
but
you
you
what
got to
would-
give him a pass, though, right? Because
Mhm.
everybody tries to use the patchwork, model for every type of sim that you ever use. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but it's really not a great, like, it's just back in the day, like they were like, okay, well, this is one that we could just see straight up damage, but it's so much more complicated than that with mechanics. And yeah, he probably would have served himself way better if he would have looked at every fight in Nax and used all of those boss fights together. Might have had a better picture, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
that would have been really hard, but yeah, would have
Yeah.
gotten better results. I think that in Ulduar, we will, as a community, when it comes to like, the dick measure contest, we're gonna log on to Warcraft logs. We're gonna click on raids. We're gonna go to Ulduar. And we're gonna go to all bosses. Oftentimes, I think all bosses is gonna be where we're actually like measuring ourselves up to the competition because there isn't
Yeah.
like a patchwork fight.
Until
Or
China
it's
takes
gonna be
over.
or it's gonna be like Algalon because it's a pretty consistent, reliable, roughly 3-minute fight. Great measurement for everyone there. I think Algalon and like all bosses, but then all bosses gets fucked because you have casters who get ridiculous gains from Hodier and Vezax, which will just skyrocket them. And so it's so weird to just look at like encounter damage or boss damage and try to measure up. It's gonna be weird.
And kill times on different bosses are also crazy. Like you'll see rogues jump like straight up now because we're killing Hygen without moving. Like we aren't dancing. We're just standing there pumping, and it's almost like a patchwork if he doesn't warp up. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. But on Hygen, apparently, it's impossible for any healer or person with a dispel to target pets. Because it's
True. Your gargoyle dies a lot. Is
it's
what I'm hearing.
so dumb. And they dispel like one. Literally today, it's like one person will do like 14k DPS, and then everyone else is like at like 6,000. You know why? Because you didn't dispel our gargoyle. It does all of our damage.
Bro, they
I am
don't
a melee
understand
warlock.
How much you invest into snapshotting that gargoyle when you have 5,000 haste rating or whatever, and like, dude, I mean, it's like, I know how much the gargoyle does, and it's like that's why I'm never gonna tricks the fucking Death Knight because the Death Knight themselves does
it gets no
shit
gain.
damage.
I love seeing that breakdown too. It's just like your pet actually did more damage. That's freaking nuts.
Yeah, it'll be like your highest damage dealing ability on like so many fights, and you're just like, yeah, that was a good snapshot. You're like, literally, you're looking at it and you're like, what was the damage that your Gary did? And it's like, that was a good snapshot, which is like interesting now because I did a speed run earlier, and I think Frost is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And Frost kind of gets like, quote unquote, like kind of down talked. Because when you focus on bosses, you have all of your procs going, right? If
Right.
you're moving quickly, as an unholy DK, if you get a proc on the last hit of a trash mob before the boss, you're so tilted. You're like, God damn it. Oh, no! Because your snapshot's going to suck, dude. It is. And like, that's just like a pattern we might see. There's RNG there. You can, like, I have a macro now that like I swap like my trinkets and stuff if I think I'm going to get to the boss in about 30 seconds. So that it can't proc my trinkets.
Yep.
But like there's that RNG involved.
Interesting. You talk about weapon damage for marksman. It's very similar to Frost. Right now we're using like blood subspec. At a certain point, we will go unholy subspec for a couple of reasons. The main one being Bloodcake's blade, which is going to scale really well with our weapon damage. Also, at a certain point, we're going to have enough armor pin to not only hit an armor pin soft cap, but eventually hit an armor pin hard cap. And on top of that, in tier 10, the 4-piece set bonus is ridiculously strong, adding even more value to just our strong like Bloodcake blade, armor pin, like heavy weapon damage build that we're going. Super late into the game. As to when do we hit that spike, the DK community is still not sure, and we still never were sure on private servers. Typically, it was in tier 9. Typically, you hit a certain point. either you were running with like Mjolnir or double DC, and you just wanted to go like Unholy subspec, and the two subspecs felt the same. But once you go Unholy, there really is no looking back. That Unholy subspec scales so well with that gear and that weapon damage that they are like taking a nice tick on like the graph of like scaling that we would be looking at.
Yeah.
The sad thing about Frost scaling is everyone else is ticking like ridiculous by
Like
that
a
point
bigger
in the
tick.
game.
Yeah.
It's a way bigger tick. Yeah. And so Frost, despite hitting like some really nice numbers, they're just comparatively a little like still like not where they want to be. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But that's typically the track record for Frost.
Nah. The fights are very long in Ulduar. But if we look at Classic, no matter what, we kill bosses so fucking fast. I don't care what you said. Bosses would last forever.
They
They
just
buffed
melt.
bosses HP by 30% in Axe. Thanks. Right? So like in Ulduar now, obviously they're giving bosses like the original version of how hard they were is the current planning. But also we're getting like an infinitely huge jump in this eye level. Like not infinitely, but like pretty significant. So with like full Biss, are we going to kill bosses pretty fast? Because then Unholy still just like goes nuts.
I think Ulduar is definitely going to be a lot different than Nax, but they're also buffing the eye levels too. So I don't know, you know.
My prediction right now is that Ulduar will feel great for the first few weeks.
Yep.
It's going to feel awesome, just like it should.
Like
And then
Sunwell.
because of the increased eye level, we will scale so much faster earlier. And the fact that like we're the classic community. Like I said at the top of the call, we take this game, we bend it over backwards and stick our finger up its bum. We're going to like burn these bosses, and we're gonna drop healers, and it's gonna be
Apparently Thorum
gonna
has
be
less
Zerg.
HP than Patchwork. Imagine us with like so much better gear. That boss is
for
dead.
real?
That's gonna be Alano just So
Wait, which one was Thorum again? Is that the one with the two hands?
He's one of the keepers, and you like go through a
Yeah.
little gauntlet thingy to access him. I think. Is that right?
Okay, I was
yeah.
thinking of the guy with the two hands. You hit his hands and then you hit his head.
We'll like
Oh, yeah,
phase we'll kill
Kolagon.
everything
You got
the
before
big
it phases. Did the hands one that literally you spread disease, drop your D&D in the middle, affliction lock stand or demo lock stand in the middle, and immolation aura. It's just gonna be like the meters are gonna look hilarious.
The thing I remember about Kolagarn is you got to run back and forth to each of the hands every single time, right? You have to change target. You spend a bunch of time running. If there's
Yep,
any fight where subtlety rogue is gonna be good,
Oh my
it's gonna be
god!
that one, because they're gonna shadow step on a 20-second cooldown and have significantly
Oh my
more
God.
uptime than the other rogues.
The combat rogue will get to cleave the head at the beginning. But
Yeah,
the
you
fight
stand in the
probably
middle.
isn't gonna
make
get
make
you
a
two
shadow
of them.
step blade flurry build. You just like
Oh
21.
shit!
Shadow step isn't the bottom of the subtlety tree.
Most guilds, the vast majority, are going to take weird compositions, and they're going to take you like they're going to take at least one or two, even if the spec is bad. Like he's talking to like the top one, you know, the 99 percenters. And
Right.
it's just like it's a weird take. I don't know.
I
The
don't
Rits
think
and
any
the mages and the warriors who are in my guild, in my roster right now, should be thankful that they are in it.
I think anyone in like the top percentage, right? The 99
Has
percenters,
extra characters, right?
you're also not like you would watch this video if they've seen this video and they're very actively like that doesn't make sense. You know, I was reading through the comments before we did this call a little bit earlier today, and like I was like, wow, people are really going with like agreeing because of the numbers and the
I know. I was
like
Yeah.
because he broke it down in numbers. And like the thing is, I love the idea behind breaking it down in numbers, and I know you definitely do, right, Simon? Because like numbers are so important, but it's not like it just this isn't a correct assumption of the numbers. It's not the right way of looking at it. It is
Right. Preach.
it's hard. It's very hard, and I think it feels bad that I think this video will do really well, and we're obviously going over it right now. So like it's obviously gotten to enough people that it's very much in our faces often. Predicting through numbers, especially with eye level scaling, is such a not weird, because I guess you don't really have another good way of predicting, and everything we would ever predict right now is purely going to be like speculation. Not purely, but a lot of speculation. But like, it's the jabs. I think it's funny to go off of this, but starting off with just jabs at like anyone. Like, I think everyone who did private servers was just an idiot and wrong. Okay, let me show you by the numbers why I'm right. And it's but wait a second, that's the wrong way of showing it though.
So, like, what Sarthe is saying is totally true. Like, having a numerical analysis can give you good results. It can also give you bad results. Just because it's a numerical analysis doesn't mean the result is irrefutable, doesn't mean the result applies to your particular raid. Like Blaze and Bobby, you're saying, like, he's probably talking to the top 1% here. And yeah, like that kind of analysis just doesn't apply to the average raider, the average, like, World of Warcraft classic enjoyer, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's like...
And like,
you got to be careful with your analysis and make sure you're doing it right and accounting for things like Slayer's set, item level 154. That's just like insanely overpowered.
Yeah, and like,
Trinkets.
and I'm not even like, I'm like in, I parse in the 90s, and my guild does too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but like, that's not even the majority of the guilds. My guild's cool with taking way too many paladins. We take way too many, and we take two warriors. Like, it's like, it's just, it's just like, most people don't adhere to we have to take the perfect comp type of deal, unless it's like 10 mana achievements and stuff of that nature.
I mean, speedruns are like, we try, like, at the top level of speedruns, you try to figure out the exact comp that's going to be like the best kind of, but that is literally less than 1% of the player base, not even, right? And then if you go to a parse raid, it's a similar situation. It's a different composition for a parse raid, but it's focused on killing the boss really fast. Most people and you're not worried about that, right? There are some classes that significantly underperform right now, obviously, but like, most people aren't too worried about. A statement of like, don't bring them to the raid is always like, that's a rough thing to say. But yes, there's classes that underperform.
If I could, go out on a limb and defend the guy for a second, I mean, it's not all 100% wrong. Like, at least like some of this is actually valuable, and I do think that some classes can get a somewhat, I wouldn't say accurate, but somewhat like close evaluation as to how they scale, and there are some trends that actually make sense with his charts.
I think warlocks make sense, but that's my like, I don't know warlocks, but warlocks scale really well. I feel like they're gonna get really fucking good. Fire mages scale really well. Marksman hunters scale really well. Yeah. Unholy DK is if the fights are short, obviously scale really well. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about it before. We just have to see how long the fights take, because you're talking about mages or warlocks. If the fights are longer, they have a longer execute phase. So like, there's just all kinds of different factors that going. Fights are longer. Like, if Unholy loses their like there's a point where that pet stops performing, right? And then that's when the longer you go, the worse that Unholy DK will do. So I think fight length is going to really be a big indicator, and we have no clue what that's going to be like.
I got to critique one thing you said. I agree that fight length is a big deal, but like, longer fight does mean longer execute phase, but the execute phase should still be roughly the same percentage time of the fight.
Yeah.
So like, an affliction warlock that pops off during, execute phase, because they have all these buffs in execute phase. Like, if they get that for 20 seconds out of 100 seconds, that's basically the same as getting it for 40 seconds out of 200 seconds.
Yeah.
The the duration of the execute phase is longer, but the percentage impact and thus the impact on your overall DPS for that boss should be roughly the same.
Unless
And
everybody else stops DPSing so the warlock can
Right.
execute. I
Yeah,
like that
unless you have a
idea.
very-
Which some might do.
I'm
No,
not
I'm
gonna
kidding. I'm
like
kidding.
honestly though, no, the Chinese law it's hilarious and I like they're so innovative, but they will do everything possible to
Mhm.
get the number one parse. So eventually it becomes like impossible even for like say the best players like Alondo. He won't even
Yeah.
be able to beat those because they will have an entire raid literally dedicated so that one person can take all of those 100s, right? And it will
remember
eventually in the
from-
phases be that way.
From level 60 Naxxramas, I saw a log from China that I thought it was just absolutely amazing. It was a healer parse for Lotheb, and it was a bunch of warlocks in the raid and a priest with Spirit of Redemption. And the priest was intentionally getting themselves killed multiple times to go into Spirit of Redemption, which was unaffected by the Lotheb
So he could heal.
healing limitation, and then resurrecting themselves with Soulstone just so they could crank out the absolute maximum amount of degenerate healing parse on Lotheb.
Oh man,
That probably
my
still
wife did
works.
that on accident back in Dax.
Baseline, we'd probably get better info if this would take a lot of work if you just simmed it. The sims have all the items in their sims right now, and you can
Mhm.
go sim your gear at those eye levels. Granted, like
Mhm.
maybe those trinkets maybe aren't exactly scripted right, maybe set bonuses aren't exactly scripted right, but
That's-
at least
yeah.
that would be a better starting place than this.
And
Yeah.
that's what I thought was interesting. Like, why not do that, right? Like, if you've put in the effort of throwing all of these numbers into like spreadsheets, so you can get the calculations and see like percentage
Mhm.
differences and eye level scaling, and then do this, and then create these actually really good looking graphs, right?
Yeah.
Why not go into the currently available information and just throw on what our version of the current like Ulduar bis would be, right? And of course, you could preface that by saying, you know, that like trinkets might not be scripted correctly, they might not have the same proc rates, and also like set bonuses could have different procs and stuff, right? So those are like two large ones, and we also don't know how the item level scaling is going to be exactly influenced. We have like an idea, but this is what the classes are going to look like instead of going off of like a Nax patchwork situation on eye level purely, when there's a lot of flaws there, obviously assuming a 1-to-1 like ratio of eye level to DPS. And like when you look at like rogues, obviously like we've talked about 1,000 times, right? Like you're using a tier 6, like
Yeah.
And with, you know, say rogues, you know, like I'll just speak to combat rogues, like the librarian paper cutter is way low. It's like item level 200 or whatever, but like it's way lower damage, but it's actually higher damage because of the way the class works and the way you get, you know, more energy, and that actually leads to more damage than your offhand's actually doing. You know what I mean? Like, so there's those types of things.
It's an item that like vastly outperforms its item level.
Yeah. Same with like greatness. Vastly outperforms its eye level. There's so many examples.
For Death Knights, let's go. Give me that strength.
But hey, so he threw shade at my feral S tier like 5 times in this video. You know, I guess I just blackballed the whole community into playing feral and just fuck me.
We got 13 seconds left, Rugs. He could throw more feral shade at the end.
So anyways, that one guy Rugs that said feral would be good, fucking idiot. And also, rogues suck. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next one.
I just want to say we kind of did meme on this guy a lot, and I feel kind of bad about that. But he put together a great video that got us all talking about this.
Yeah.
He started with a very good idea. We had some critiques. I don't want people to like. Obviously, we don't want anyone to be like going and harassing this person. We want to welcome this person into the community and try to like engage with them in a positive way. I know that's difficult for a lot of World of Warcraft players trying to engage with someone you disagree with, but like I really want to stress this. Like, this is such an interesting and controversial video that we
Mhm.
all got together just to talk about it,
Yeah.
you know, and talk about like where this idea started, like how this guy interpreted it, and how we think maybe this idea could be done, you know, to produce better or more reliable results.
And for
I think-
you as like the everyday listener, like we need more people like this who will put in the kind of effort to research the million various different things that need research in our game. And that could be you for your guild helping research like deep dives into logs or whatever type of performance you want to like zoom in on. Go for it. Like we need that in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
the premise really, like, yeah, the premise really started out really well. And I think if he goes into more of like, instead of, yeah, we memed on it a little, but the constructive criticism of like the ideas are there. Now look at it from the different perspectives and make it kind of all encompassing. It's a lot more work, obviously, but it'll be more reliable. I think things could be pretty sick if he does it like really well. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
the video was well put together. It was done well. The information looks really good. It's just obviously misleading from the trained eye. And I think if you spend enough time taking, like, if he spent enough time taking the time to realize why it was misleading, then he could easily make something that's really well done.